all. It is now 1:30, and it is time for us to return. Ms. Marin?
Yes, hi.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Marin?
Yes.
I will go ahead and leave it up to you to take roll and just to take us through the next section. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Anderson. Okay, just gonna run down the list here, showing on Blackboard. So Ms. Omesh.
Here.
Ms. Tolan.
I'm here, thank you.
Hello. Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Good afternoon.
Hello. Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
Here.
Mr. Frisch.
Here.
Ms. Cohen.
Here.
Ms. McLaughlin.
Here.
Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
I'm here.
Ms. Prakarsky.
I am here.
Hello. And Ms. Darnett Koufax.
Here.
Okay, we're all here and accounted for. Well, welcome to the first, I think ever, first quarter budget review. I'm happy to be leading this with my my vice chair of the budget committee, Ms. Darnett Koufax. And it's, we're all trying to get more involved with the budget process to be sure that we are being the best stewards we can of our public resources. So I just want to note that the final presentation was posted today, and I know that we do like to receive these earlier than later. We actually met with the budget committee yesterday. We meet on Mondays to touch base, and so the final presentation wasn't available, until we finished that managers meeting. So apologies for that delay, but just know that everyone's got their full plates, so the best effort was made. So regarding these quarterly reviews, these are different than the bulk of where most of our attention is spent when it comes to budget, which is about budget development of the future year. Today, we're talking about execution of the current budget, and that we provide that oversight through these quarterly reviews. So it gives us this opportunity to revise the current budget, based on current year trends and new things that have come up. But so today we're just going to receive that first quarter about the current FY21 budget. So as I said, this is the first. We normally don't receive a first quarter report because there usually isn't enough data in the first quarter to accurately estimate costs for the entire year ahead. We can extrapolate ahead. The first quarter ends in September when the teachers and school-based staff, which are our largest employees, have been back at work for just a month. So again, this uses a very scant amount of data on which we can make projections. But given the pandemic, we had agreed identifying a need to have this additional financial reporting at this time to be as on top of things as we can in the changing atmosphere here. So we will have the mid-year review in December, the third quarter review in May, and the end of year will actually be in July. So after that fiscal year closes on June 30 and then in July. So in these quarterly budget reviews, the superintendent recommends changes to the budget based on updated revenue and expenditure estimates. And that's what you're going to see today in terms of the revenue and expenditures. So this is an informational presentation. No action is requested. So just to regroup, we're going to be looking at the FY21 or current year operating budget revenue and expenditure data, the status of new federal funding sources around the pandemic, and then end with an update about food nutrition services particularly. So with that, I will turn it over to Lee Burden, our Director of Financial Services. Thank you.
Good afternoon. If we can put the PowerPoint up, thank you, and go ahead and move to the next slide. Before you are the agenda topics that we'll be discussing this afternoon, like Ms. Marin just said. I will give a little bit of a background of quarterly budget reviews and their purpose, and then a revenue update, updates on the Coronavirus Relief Fund, the CARES Act state set-aside funding, projected savings for the first quarter, and then, of course, a food services update. Next slide. As Ms. Marin mentioned, the purpose of the quarterly budget reviews is to provide the school board with information about the funds under their control and allow an opportunity to review all of the school department and centralized budgets to determine if any adjustments are required. For each review, financial services staff and the financial department liaisons evaluate available balances and review expenditures. And the review provides information about funds reallocation within departments to ensure that we have adequate funding. Additional funds for previously approved items that might cost more than was budgeted, or a request for funds for a new program that are deemed critical is also determined typically in the quarterly reviews. And again, we have 3 stages: the mid-year that comes in December, the third quarter that comes in March, and year-end in July. Today, we are going to receive a first quarter report about the current year fiscal 21 budget. Again, we normally do not prepare a first quarter report because we don't have enough data to be able to accurately estimate costs for the entire year. But y'all requested a first quarter, and in this pandemic, it's important to keep an eye on the finances. And so we have brought this report to you today. And go to the next slide. We'll start with the revenue update for the school operating fund. About 25% of our budget is funded by the state, or about $775 million. On August 18th, Governor Northam convened a special session of the 2020 General Assembly and introduced an amended 2022 biennial budget, including an updated revenue forecast, which affects public education in Virginia. The original reforecast included an expected reduction in sales tax, which for FCPS meant a loss of $20 million, but that has been revisited and the funds have been reinstated. Our state funding is largely based on student counts, and that has been a concern because traditionally funds are allocated based on September 30 in student counts, which across the Commonwealth are low, and we believe temporarily low. State funding is allocated based on September 30 with an update in March. So we would see normally, if we reported September 30 and they use those numbers, a reduction in revenue that would begin in January. The conference amendments that are currently being considered would delay any reduction until the March enrollment is reported. So for now, we are safe on that end. Next slide, please. Regarding federal revenue, on September 15th, 2020, the County Board of Supervisors allocated $19.6 million in federal coronavirus relief funds to FCPS to support safe and equitable instruction for students. On October 8th, Governor Northam announced a new allocation of federal coronavirus aid, Recovery and Economic Security Act dollars to help K-12 public schools in Virginia. Our allocation, including the city of Fairfax, totals $32.2 million. It's important to note that the eligibility period for both of these funding sources is through December 30th of 2020. Yes, December 30th of 2020, just about a little over 2 months away. Funding can be used for eligible expenses from March through December 30th of 2020. They cannot be accounted for in the budget most recently approved as of March 27th, which was the date of enactment of the CARES Act for the state or the government. And examples of eligible expenses include, PPE, expenses to facilitate distance learning, technology improvements in connection with school closings, those sorts of things. There are also 2 other federal sources. The CARES grant, which you all are aware of, that was the original grant that we were allocated back in the summer. That's $20.1 million. Actually, we knew about it in the spring because it's included in the fiscal 21 school board approved budget, and that's $20.1 million. And then there's also a CARES status set aside, which is more specific pot of funding that actually supports their grant fund, and that was $3 million for specific purposes. The next slide. So with that early timeline, you know, that is going to be problematic for us. Again, it's only, you know, a little over 2 months away. So we have started to shift some of the original CARES funding items to the CRF funding. The CARES funding, we're able to spend those funds until September 30 of 2022. So we have a much longer timeline with that. It was also VDOE's guidance that we should start to shift what we had originally planned in the CARES grant application over to the CRF funding. That will require a revamping of our grant application because, you know, that was pretty much approved, ready to go. But, you know, this is what we have to do. So we have shifted technology items, PPE items, cleaning and sanitizing supplies, some digital resources for instruction, and the half-year cost of new positions from the other funding sources like the original CARES grant into the CRF funds so that we can, you know, be able to fully access those funds. Some other things that we're looking at, some other strategies to maximize that funding is the previous fiscal year, fiscal 20 COVID-related expenditures. There was a good bit of items that were purchased with, you know, existing local funds in fiscal 20. And we think that many of those will be allowable for reimbursement against this new pot of funding, the CRF funding. We also are able to add additional PPE. We're allowed to have a 2 months reserve for those kinds of things. Originally, our plan had been to provide PPE to all of the schools and departments that they needed, but that replenishment of those items, you know, the schools and the departments would need to handle that with their existing budgets. At this point, it makes more sense for us to go ahead and fund additional PPE, you know, keeping an eye that we don't have more than 2 months on reserve and purchasing that so that the schools and the departments don't have to use their existing school operating dollars. Another thing that we're talking about as a strategy to fully use all the CRF funding is replacement laptops for selected elementary grades. You know that we repurposed computers for those elementary grades in order to stand up distance learning. But some of those computers are slated for replacement. And if we are able to actually receive delivery of laptops by December 30th, then that would be appropriate for the CRF funding as well. We have a good bit of our teacher laptops that are scheduled for regular replacement in this year. And those items would, you know, improve their ability to handle distance learning. And so that's something also that we're looking at to shift to the CRF funding. And then, of course, we're collaborating with the departments for any other needs that they might have that are related to the COVID that would be an allowable usage of the CRF funding. If you could go to the next slide, please. This chart shows all the funding sources the division has available to address the pandemic by category, with federal sources listed first and then local sources. So the first column shows the county CRF funding at $19.6 million. Again, that was approved on September 15th and has a deadline for funds to be spent, not obligated, but spent, which means that whatever we purchase, we have to take delivery of it or spend those funds by December 30th. And so the county CRF funding pretty much falls into the categories that we indicated when we made the request, and that is technology for MiFi, bandwidth, Google, and classroom cameras, and then PPE, masks, hand sanitizer, and disposable thermometers, plexiglass, and PPE packets for health aides. All of the county CRF funding has been allocated at this point. The challenge will be receiving all of the items that we're planning on purchasing with these funds by December 30th. Next column represents the state CRF funding, which is $32.2 million. Again, we got notice of the approval of those funds on October 8th, and those funds too are to be spent by December 30th of 2020. So we have shifted everything that we can from the other funding sources into this fund so that we can fully allocate those funds. So all of the PPE, face coverings, that includes masks, shields, disposable cloth, gloves, hand sanitizer, thermometers, all of those items we are shifting to the CRF fund so that we'll be able to access those funds first. We also have, special education screener and some digital resources, software for online learning. Those items too are expected to be purchased prior to December 30th and received. And so those items too have been shifted from the CARES grant to the CRF funds. We do have $15.7 million that is unallocated currently in the CRF fund. But again, we do have some strategies to be able to access those funds, like the previous year's COVID-related expenditures, additional PPE, in backstock, replacement laptops for elementary grades and teachers, and then, our collaboration with the other departments. The third column is the original CARES grant application for $20.1 million, which is in the school board's approved budget. And the deadline for spending those funds is September 30th of 2022. So the items that have ended up in that fund are things that haven't occurred yet or aren't expected to occur prior to December 30th, like hourly teacher funds, per pupil amounts allocated to schools, remediation and recovery costs for special education, custodial cleaning. But we do still have $9.7 million that is unallocated, but we have time with this set of funds, and there's much uncertainty ahead. So we know, we don't think that we'll have any difficulty allocating those funds and fully being able to access that by September of 2022. The fourth column is the set-aside grants that I talked about previously. It's a small amount, $3 million. It's in the grant fund. The deadline for those funds is also September of 2022. And the usage for these funds is very specific. We had to do a grant application, and the bulk of it's technology at $1.9 million for MiFis. There's also some funds in there for intervention and support and PPE. And then the last three columns are local funds, both a mix, there's recurring and non-recurring funds. The three funding sources that are out of local funds combined total $21 million. We have shifted, again, everything that we can from those funding sources into the federal funding sources, but we still have about $10.3 million unallocated. But those funds, of course, are the funds that are the most flexible in that they are locally funded. And so if they are unspent, we can carry them forward into the next year. If you can go to the next slide. So the savings listed here are potential fiscal 21 savings. And this reflects the first quarter savings calculation from July through September, which is about $4.1 million. It's important to note that these are one-time savings that are based on the first quarter only. The full year estimated savings will change as the return to school plan and other factors continue to evolve. You cannot multiply these numbers by 4 and come up with an annual savings that we would expect, because the savings will depend on when we return to school. Like, we might need more substitutes, and so no further savings would be found in those areas. Or we would have savings in utilities, but less than what we saw in the first quarter. We're all virtual, but the utilities is really just representing the month of September in the sense that, our schools don't normally have students in July and August anyway. If you could go to the next slide. Now, moving to the Food and Nutrition Services program update. This is the good news slide. Food Services has delivered over 3.7 meals to FCPS students and families since mid-March. In August, we were serving approximately 16,000 breakfast and lunch meals per day at up to 65 locations. But since then, we've added breakfast and lunch meals for Saturday and Sunday at all sites. We've added supper meals and snacks and expanded to all grab-and-go sites and bus routes. We have 81 bus routes, 51 grab-and-go sites as of today, and we will have set up 25 Fairfax meal kit sites by early November, where we provide meals in bulk for 7 days with preparation instructions, both breakfast and lunch, so families only have to make one trip to receive meals for a full week. And we are, of course, supporting the 37 SRS sites with meals as well. We continue to ramp up our notification to parents in the community and providing more parent outreach with our food distribution webpage, which has everything you need to know about how to get meals for your family. We're just distributing flyers, sending e-notify messages, and placing meal distribution info on school marquees as well. You can go to the next slide. Now, as far as the finances of food services, you should know that prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the food services fund balance totaled $17.6 million. The Food and Nutrition Services Fund was affected significantly by school closure last year. They continue to provide meals at grab-and-go sites free of charge to students, but obviously cafeteria staff were not working. We did receive reimbursement from the federal government, but there was a significant decrease in revenue resulting from a lack of paid participants, which eroded the fund balance by about $11 million, leaving a remaining fund balance of $6.5 million at the conclusion of fiscal 20 and moving into fiscal 21. If you can go to the next slide, please. So looking at food and nutrition services in fiscal 21, their approved budget totals $85.4 million. About 68% or $57.8 million of that fund is staffing, salaries, benefits, and contractual obligations like leases and items like that. The remaining 32% or $27.6 million is logistics dollars and materials for things like food costs, supplies, those sorts of things. But we've revamped the logistics budget, the non-salary budget, and reduced the total budget by $16 million based on our best estimate of having, looked at the grab and go and what the materials, supplies, and food cost to provide that program. And so the fiscal 21 revised food and nutrition program total $69.4 million, or a reduction of about $16 million. You can go to the next slide, please. I'm sure that you all are aware that the USDA has extended no-cost meals to all children through June 30th of 2021. We need approximately 97,000 breakfasts and lunches, which would generate $64 million in federal reimbursement to break even. Our largest participation day was last Friday, and that was over 66,000 meals served. And on that day, you should know as well, we also distributed about 75,000 Saturday and Sunday meals along with the 66,000. Our estimated projected loss through the first quarter totals $2.3 million. But based on the current participation, the projected loss across 10 months would be about $27 million. And that's the $33 million minus that $6.5 million that we do have in the fund balance for a net of $27 million. But it's important to point out as well that all this depends on when we come back to school. If 50% of our students came back to school and, that was 90,000, just in big round numbers. You know, we would be very, very close, and they all availed themselves of a breakfast and lunch at FCPS. Then, you know, we would come very close to breaking even, and the supplement to the food services fund would be limited. It would not be as great as the number that we're looking at right now. So this is going to be evolving, and you know, we're doing everything that we can to ramp up participation, with that 97,000 meals per day being our goal. You can go to the next slide. Next steps. The state CRF funding requires appropriation authority by the school board, and so we'll be bringing that to the school board on October 27th rather, as action. The food service fund, we are going to continue our fiscal monitoring and analysis of the food services fund. Updates will be provided on a quarterly basis. So in December, when we come back with mid-year, that is when, you know, we'll know a little bit more, and we'll be bringing a supplemental request, which could come out of, you know, projected savings, like the ones we just identified, the beginning balance. We have reserve funds that we could access. There are, you know, a couple of strategies we can use to provide support, supplemental support to the food services fund. And we'll be providing that on a quarterly basis. But that will come back to you all at the mid-year budget review on December 3rd for the allocation, supplemental allocation to make them whole for the previous, you know, 4 or 5 months. And that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Burden, our Assistant Superintendent for Financial Services. At this point, I will go ahead and open it up to some questions. Go ahead and start with Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
Thank you so much, Ms. Burden. You always give very clear and robust presentations, so it is greatly appreciated. And you were able to anticipate some of the questions that I had regarding our ability to reimburse ourselves for funding in the past, using the very aggressive timeline for spending CARES Act funding. So I appreciate the generosity of both the Board of Supervisors and the state in providing us more funding, but also that we have been able to utilize it by paying things that we had reimbursing ourselves for other expenditures. I do have a question, and my biggest question is regarding the food services. And I'm a little concerned by your timeline that says wait and see, and let's see where we're at on December 3rd. And my reason that I'm concerned about that is that this board has repeatedly, since March, asked for a plan on how we can utilize staff elsewhere that are not able to perform their core jobs. So my questions are, how many staff are we using on a daily basis, and how many are we not using? And what are we doing to more effectively utilize staff in other parts of the school system, as well as it looks like we will have $27 million as a shortfall. So what won't we do elsewhere to make up for that $27 million shortfall? I don't think we can wait until December to have this conversation and understand better what the school system is doing to mitigate these costs.
Right. Well, you know, as we continue to ramp up, you know, we expect to have all food and nutrition services employees working daily. For now, we're minimizing as much as possible through rotation of staff and matching food and nutrition services staff with schools with needs. Another thing that's come up just today, in fact, is that the bus drivers are going to need to be able to take the temperatures of students as they return on buses. And that is something that, of course, the bus driver is not able to do. And so food services staff may be able to assist in that area. Again, we're matching FNS staff up with schools that need additional help. And the other question I think you had was about the 27 million. You know, that is, for now, that is our worst case scenario based on current participation. But, you know, if when we get back to school, then those numbers will all change. And, you know, like I said, if we brought 50% back to school and they all avail themselves of breakfast and lunch, and then we still provide grab and go meals for those that opt for virtual, you know, we certainly have an opportunity to get up to that 97,000 per day magic number that would ensure that the federal reimbursement can cover all of our costs. We do have some strategies to be able to deal with whatever supplemental funding the food services fund is going to need. And, you know, the savings that we identified, some of the reserve funds that we have available, and the beginning balance for fiscal 22, that is also a source of funding that we could use if we had to.
So along those lines, Ms. Burden, I will reiterate my question. How many are we rotating on an in and out of work basis? And what is the plan, what has been the plan, which we asked for since last spring, on how we are actually utilizing staff that aren't able to do their base jobs, as well as what are the specific strategies that you allude to, but say that we'll know about them in December. I would prefer knowing about them sooner rather than later, because I understand that this is a challenge for us, but it's a challenge throughout Fairfax County when we don't have a clear plan on how we're spending taxpayer dollars. So if you could address those, that would be really appreciated. Thank you.
So, I mean, like I said, we're minimizing as much as possible. I don't have a number as far as how many staff are rotating, but we are matching food and nutrition services staff with schools that have needs that can be addressed by food and nutrition services staff. We are rotating those staff. You know, I'll tell you honestly, we would like to do everything possible to avoid furloughs or layoffs of food and nutrition services staff.
So would we, which is why we asked starting in March. So I see Mr. Smith put his hand up. Maybe he can answer the more detailed question.
Yes,
on how you're doing operational staff.
Yes, I'm looking through the next steps now, because we did provide the board a response regarding how we were using our support staff. A lot of that was focused on our bus drivers at the time, and how we've assigned them to work in schools and support actions that are happening in individual schools across the system. With our food and nutrition service workers, we are rotating them through so that we can feed our students and staff. You can see from the numbers that Ms. Burden talked about, and I'm turning my camera on here just so that I'll be polite and everyone can see me. There we are. As Ms. Burden shared, that with our food and nutrition service workers, they are being rotated through so that they can support the meals for the 3.7 million meals that we've provided for students since the beginning of the pandemic. In having a conversation with Ms. Perrone yesterday, that at any given time, as our staff are working through, we may have between 100 and 200 workers who aren't working, but that they are continuing to work on a rotating basis to provide that meal support. We're also looking at providing support in classrooms as classroom monitors for certain staff who may be out on ADA, and those monitors would come from our food and nutrition staff service workers as well. So we have provided that. I'll be looking through so that we can identify exactly which next step we answered and provide that to the board. And we're looking to see how we can use these workers throughout. But one of the things that's most difficult for us is as we're utilizing staff in different positions throughout the division, as we do bring students back, we have to pull them off of those work assignments back to their primary assignments. And so if we do assign staff to work in other areas, once we ramp up transportation, we'll have to pull those individuals back. Once we ramp up food within our buildings, we'll have to pull those individuals back. So it is a delicate balance.
So, Mr. Smith, I know my time's up, but the response to the next steps was a general response. It actually didn't give us specific numbers and how each category was being deployed or redeployed. I'm looking for much more granularity than just generalities of we might do this or we might do that, because that's really what our constituents are looking for. And so if we could have that level of specificity, I would appreciate that.
And we can follow up in the next step with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett-Sanders. Ms. McLaughlin, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Marion. I'm very happy to be following Ms. Corbett-Sanders on these questions that are being answered by Ms. Burden and Mr. Smith. I don't find the answers very reassuring, to be quite honest. The board has been clear since March that we absolutely, like the county, want to redeploy our employees as much as possible, avoid furloughs and layoffs, but we're just not getting clear information here on the actual numbers. I'm not so concerned on how you're utilizing them. You're making that clear that you're redeploying them around the county. The what, in terms of how many numbers per day, Mr. Smith, to be honest, 100 to 200 employees on any given day sitting home is quite a wide range. I'd like a little more clarity on that first. And secondly, what's very concerning to me is we are hearing from our teachers and school-based staff how they are working 15-hour days, 7 days a week. They're overwhelmed. And then we're continuing to carry employees on our payrolls who we haven't been able to redeploy. And so people are being paid, but they aren't working. And I just, when I think about the workload that is on everyone who is working, I'm disappointed that it doesn't sound we've done really an effective job for redeploying people. I'm also concerned about this estimation that if we bring back 90 to 100,000 kids and they all have to eat meals, that's how we're going to close this funding gap. As the mother of 3 parents in this school system for 18 years, my children rarely ate in the cafeteria. So I'm worried that we're making this projection that we'd have to have everybody eating, and not everyone wants to have their children eating the food that's provided through FNS. So I would like to have a better understanding why we're having trouble now in the middle of October, still trying to figure out how to effectively utilize everyone who's on our payroll. This was talking about FNS. We didn't even talk about our other employees, and that's something the board continues to ask about. So that should have been in today's presentation as well. So I guess at a macro level, Dr. Brabrand, maybe you and your team can answer this question now, or we've got to get it answered soon. Please provide a detailed list of all the employees that you've attempted to redeploy and who's not being redeployed. And that has to include people who are rotating in and out of working on a daily basis. We're only talking about FNS, but there's a whole host of other employees that we're not even capturing today. So could I have Dr. Brabrand and his team speak to this issue?
Sure, Ms. McLaughlin. As Mr. Smith already shared, we have redeployed transportation and food and nutrition folks. We're also extending that as we begin to do return to school, to do temperature checks on buses and to provide additional opportunities to have classroom monitors where we have a teacher for an ADA accommodation that may need to stay as a remote teacher or to teach virtually, but still have a classroom monitor in. So these pieces have been evolving as we developed our RTS plan, and we can provide additional detail on what those specific numbers are as we're processing the ADAs and as we're doing our new routes with the temperature checks for our buses. So we'd be glad to do that.
And
I
I see that
appreciate, but it needs to be stated that we're now 6 weeks into the school year, and this is something the board asked back in March. So, Dr. Braber, I appreciate the how, but again, I'm going to go to we need the numbers, and I appreciate your willingness to get that to us as soon as possible.
Ms. McLaughlin, may I address some of your questions?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Plattenberg. Happy to have you do that.
Okay, so I know there's been a lot of conversation about this, and I understand the urgency. We certainly feel it as well, as been stated. But when you take a look at my attendance, I have 95% of my attendance. That's about 500 attendants. I have 474 that are currently working each and every day. Of the groups that I have, of my transportation personnel, I have 80% of them, the drivers that are currently working. I have a number that are having the ADA accommodations being reviewed. But as we look to continue to ramp up, I've got 80 that are in the grab and go pilots, the grab and go meals. I have 27 that are supporting the SRS. The current pilots, I have a couple of drivers, about 10 drivers that are supporting that. What started today, I have 400 drivers. So the point is the evolution of the use of these employees. And I understand that it was asked about in March, and we've been working urgently. That's why the initial response was provided that it was, and it was vague. But as we've been able to ramp up, we've shown the need for these employees. I can only sustain the temperature checks on the buses through Group 4 based upon our current experiences. And granted, I'm going off of what I'm learning from today and this morning's runs that went extremely well, because of all of the planning that we've been doing for the preschool and the PAC students. Albeit sad and almost broke my heart to watch students walking off with masks and getting temperature checks by people in gowns and face shields and so forth. It is something that is working and getting our drivers back. And then the other thing I would say is, as we go into Group 4 and Group 5, I believe that I'm going to have all of my drivers up until Group 6 that are going to be redeployed and reusing. So that difference between the 80% that I currently have for the drivers, and I mentioned I already have my attendants, basically all of them working. I will need food service workers. In fact, I'm sorry for Ms. Burden, but I've gone ahead and hired a couple of our food service workers as attendants because of my shortfall. So I do have, and we can provide the responses that Mr. Smith and Dr. Brabrand have mentioned, but I did want to go ahead and provide you with some specific details because I know that's what you're looking for, and I do understand that, and that we do have them, but it will evolve to be the utilization of those people to what Mr. Smith had kind of alluded to. I didn't want it to go on to the next questions without making sure that folks knew we are facing this, we do understand, and we are working diligently to try and identify the exacting numbers for your benefit and use, and also for the awareness of the community as a whole. So thank you very much, and I'm sorry I took so much time.
Thanks, Jeff.
Both of your questions, Ms. McLaughlin?
I would like Mr. Smith to provide a little more clarity what Dr. Brabrand said. Does this system know right now at this very moment what is the actual number of employees that we're not using on a daily basis but are still on our payrolls? I mean, I know they're talking about rotating people, but what number have we not been able to redeploy yet that we continue to carry on our payrolls and they're not working every day? I think that's an important number.
So we don't have numbers for those individuals because we know that based on our employees who work in our schools, that our principals have worked very diligently to deploy their staff within their buildings. We know that within our departments, work is still being accomplished. We have many employees who are able to telework, and for those who aren't teleworking, they are coming in to their workplaces. So do we have the exact numbers? No, I do not. I can't give you those exact numbers. But what I can tell you is that our staff are working hard to continue the mission of our school system and support our students and staff.
Mr. Smith, I so appreciate your best attempts, but I'm actually really troubled by the response. It's not a hard question to know I just asked who's not being redeployed yet, or who that we know we can only utilize partially, and so they're rotating on and off, but they're not working every single day. I think it's reasonable for taxpayers and this school board to ask that question. We're more than 6 months into the pandemic. I know from talking with the county executive, they do know department by department, services by services, who they've used. They set up a whole redeployment office. And I think that Fairfax County Public Schools absolutely should be able to answer that same question. And I will just continue to press for that information and perhaps, Ms. Marin, I know it's time to move on to another person's turn, but maybe my other colleagues will help me out on this one. But I think today's information to date is not sufficient about, again, we have employees who are working 15 hours a day. And then there's other employees that we're hearing that we keep them on the payroll and we haven't been able to redeploy them on a daily basis. I think that's a problem.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. I agree. It's of the utmost importance. So I hear what you're saying.
Ms. Marin, Ms. Perrone is just joined the conversation, and I believe she can provide some further detail.
Great. Ms. Perrone?
Hi, yep. So looking at our staff base of food service employees, we have 1,246 in the system today, and we have about 60 on leave. All of our food service managers, so we have about 250 or so food service managers and managers in training, are working every day. We have a little over 50 drivers who are working every day. All of our central office are working every day, and the remaining are our food service workers who are, work in the cafeterias every day. We have close to 980. Out of those 980 at this point, we have about 820 working daily, and those numbers are increasing every week as we scale up our food distribution and as we work to support in-person instruction. So we hope to have all employees working within the next 3 to 4 weeks. We're working to move employees around to help support areas that have a bigger demand for food distribution, and are looking at ways where we can support schools and have our staff work in other school-based positions.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Barron, could you just make sure I'm on a go back?
Sure.
Thank you.
Ms. Tolan.
Yes. One thing I wanted to mention is I was very relieved to hear that we were using some of that newer funding to have a reserve of PPE and not to rely on schools to replenish the PPE. I was a little confused about that as we were going through the last couple of months as to exactly where that money was going to be coming from, as we needed more of that safety equipment. And, I'm really reluctant to leave that up to the individual schools to be providing, because I feel like if we are having staff and students in the schools, that we should know what safety equipment they need and make sure that it's provided. So providing it from more of a central funding source where we can track that, I think makes a lot more sense. I did have a question I'll ask, but I did want to make a comment that I've heard rave reviews of the Fairfax meal packages that families can pick up, 7, weeks worth of meals at one time. It has relieved a lot of burden for our working families to be able to just do that one pickup. So thank you so much for implementing that. I repeatedly hear that, and I heard this in our last return to school work session as well, that there are issues at some of our schools with bandwidth. If we have students moving back into the schools and if they're going to be using their laptops, at varying levels. So I'm wondering if someone could tell me how bad that is, and if some of that that $15 million that is unallocated should be utilized to further improve bandwidth at our schools. Thank you.
Mr. Sethi, you want to go ahead? Oh, Mr. Sethi, I believe you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for the question. My understanding right now is that we have upgraded our bandwidth in the schools from potentially what was there in the spring. We are also working to upgrade. We have the infrastructure on order from this funding sources, which is going to add another 50% capacity on top of the previous upgrade. So the goal is to go all the way up to what we term as 60 GB sort of a connection, which is a pretty substantially large connection. And then we are balancing that with the RTS program, because we are bringing students back in waves. We'll make sure that we keep ramping up as the students come in waves to have adequate bandwidth. At this point, knowing of the plan and the pilot, we feel pretty comfortable with the bandwidth we have. There's some discussion in what the model looks like in the classroom, right? When the student is connected, the teacher's connected, are we broadcasting it live? Those variables is what we need to account for as we work for pilots. So we're really excited with the pilots and looking into those and kind of learning from them to be able to implement any changes if we need to. We feel pretty comfortable right now.
Okay, good. So you'll utilize that information from those pilots that we're doing over the next 2 weeks on concurrent learning and other learning models.
Yeah, we are tracking how much speed those schools are using as they bring back. Those are going to be small numbers, but it gives us some sense of how the staff ends up using it.
Okay, good. So hopefully at our work session November 12th, we'll have more information on that.
We'll have some data.
All right, fantastic. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Tolan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Eismer-Heiser.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Ms. Tolan actually asked some of the questions that I wanted to ask. So I just wanted to sort of pick up on what she said. I appreciate she talking about the set asides and the unreserved funding for some of these needs. And Mr. Sethi, to follow with bandwidth and what we're learning from our pilots, there's been talk about cameras and document cameras and things being on back order. Do you think we have enough funding for cameras, document cameras, and can get them in time for some of these models that we're looking at? I don't know if that's something that's been part of our budget discussions yet or not, or if we're really just waiting for the results of the pilot program.
I'm going to have to lean in on enough funding. I imagine the allocations, I understand the allocations were done in Lake and probably help me true it up. But the amount of equipment we need, we from the pilot are looking at what are the appropriate technologies, and it's unique, right? Each classroom could be slightly different. If I'm teaching math, my pedagogy is completely different than if I'm teaching and in terms of how my students see my work. So this pilot is going to help us understand, but in terms of the amount of time it takes to kind of buy technology nowadays, which is impossible. Some of the stuff is like finding gold. We are preemptively buying certain amount of technology, which we feel is going to be truly useful. Like the camera conversation, we have already started purchasing some of those cameras. I'm going to follow up with larger orders as we kind of figure out from the pilot how many schools and how many classrooms will use them effectively. There's a series of different tech which can be bought.
That's my concern, is to make sure you're out, the cart and the horse, right? We're waiting for the pilot, but then we might get further behind on being able to get our supplies here on time. So I wanted to bring that up as a concern. And thank you, Mr. Safety, for that answer. Ms. Burden, if you don't mind, on the set aside in terms of having funding for this equipment?
Pardon me?
I asked about whether in some reserved COVID funding, whether they have funding for cameras and things and enough for what we may need for the concurrent or other models.
Yes, I think we actually have 8.6 million slated for cameras. And I think that's for 14,200 classrooms. But the challenge is going to be taking delivery of that prior to December 30th.
Thank you. And I wanted to pick up a little bit on what Ms. McLaughlin was talking about, our staffing concerns. I have also been hearing a lot about teacher overwhelm from principals, about concerns about having classroom monitors in place for if we need that for when we face students in, for inconsistent use of staffing. In some schools, I think our specialists are doing a great job supporting teachers, and other schools not as much. Can someone talk about whether in this budget we have the staffing, we have funding for staffing we need to phase students in, as well as if we could talk a little more about how are we utilizing all of our personnel to support our teacher overwhelm, because I'm hearing so many stories about that, as well as planning for phasing in. Can we do an analysis, I guess, on what we did an analysis as we're phasing in and we're looking at our ADA requests on how many classroom monitors we may need, where we can pull that staffing from, how we can give additional staffing resources to our schools. That might be a better way of phrasing my question.
Yeah. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, that's what we're going to do is as we go through the processing of the ADAs, who needs, again, it's an interactive process. There may be interventions we can do that fall short of needing a monitor, but where a monitor is needed, being able to collect that data school by school and then showing you where we're getting it. It may be some of, as Mr. Smith talked about, reallocating existing personnel. It may be doing some of our subs off the sub pool. We have 599 substitutes that have said they would come back. That's a smaller pool than what we had before.
Mm-hmm.
And we may look actually at some additional hiring that we can do. We're already talking to the Virginia Employment Commission about some links of people who are looking for work that we could train and have them in as monitors so that we can do everything we can to lean in to returning to school in person with the supports that some of our teachers need to make that happen. So yeah, we can provide that report as we're going further in of what mix of existing employees, reallocated, use of subs, or even some off the street hires.
Thank you. I just want to make sure this is happening as part of our budget discussions and budget reviews, especially as we're reviewing our COVID funds and CARES Act funding that we are. I know a lot of principals are concerned about that staffing. I'm glad Ms. Tolan brought up the issue around PPE and central supplying of PPE versus schools. I wanted to pick up on that point as well. Look beyond PPE, really all of the materials a school might need. Some might need more paper towels, for example, given hand washing, and also look at each school's unique demographic. If the school has more preschool classes, they may need more PPE. I want to ask if that's being budgeted for.
Yeah, thank you. Jeff Plannenberg, can you talk a little bit about how we've managed, which we've done for years, the managing of inventory and knowing what school rates are of those kind of needs and supporting custodians for that? Mr. Plannenberg, are you still there? I see Jeff on.
I'm sorry, I was having problems with my mic again.
Can you talk a little bit about how we've done inventory management, which I think, frankly, we do prior to COVID to look at supply, demand across individual schools and stocking of the supplies and how we would continue that through this pandemic, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Dr. Bergman. Yeah, and it was a great question, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, because the reality is we have two different approaches where at the secondary schools, we have a vendor management system where we have a vendor who supplies our schools for the consumable materials that they use, the gloves, the cleaning supplies, and so forth. And we do it at the elementary level. It's a matter of magnitude and scale and the staffing that we have to make sure that we do it. But what it allows us to do is it allows us to have the metrics of consumption, if you will. So we're able to see how those things are used and at what rate they're used. We believe that we've, based upon our previous consumption and based upon the projections of the usage due to this pandemic, we believe that we're ahead of the program in knowing what exactly it will take. In addition, when we started talking about the enhanced filtration that where we can purchase the MERV 13, we already have a 90-day replacement program on all of our filters across the division. And as I mentioned before, you know, we've got 45,000 active air filters of 800 different sizes. So when you have 37,000 pieces of different HVAC equipment and you have those numbers of filters, our processes have to be pretty tight in terms of our cyclic replacement program. So we're able to take a look at the increase in the filtration and the rate of replacement that would be. So we forecast and projected based upon the metrics that we have. And to Dr. Brabrand's point about having those in place, it allows us to feel like we're in a pretty good position. And that's one of the reasons why working with procurement services, when we provided for you the 2-month forecast of need of supplies to have on hand at any one time, it will help us have what I think is a buffer if we see that consumption rate increasing or decreasing in any one or another specific area. I hope that answers your question.
Just only part about each school's unique makeup in terms of number of preschool classes, if that's been taken into account in terms of budgeting.
Absolutely, and it does actually, it is reflected on the school's consumption, and you think about the number of preschool classes that they may have and also the size of the school itself. So where in the past, where those students would have been, but yes, it does take into account those special metrics.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. Dr. Anderson, you want to go ahead?
Yes, I do want, I have a question. I thought I was next.
No, you're right.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, and Ms. Concurrent will be next. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marin. I'm glad to follow after Ms. Sizemore-Heiser because one of my questions were regarding, you know, some of these savings that we're not anticipating is how can we best support what is going on in our schools currently. I know that our schools, primarily in my area, our Title I schools are overstretched in terms of the impact on our parent liaisons, in terms of how they are reaching out to families and ensuring engagement. I wonder if it bears some further consideration to see if additional hours can be provided to support those efforts. I also want to speak to technology. While I know we're on our way to having these discussions and having plans to return to school, and I do realize the time frame when it comes to procuring some of these devices, but going back to a conversation that we had since March, April, regarding devices for students who are pre-K to 2, whether or not they have the most appropriate devices, the most current devices. And I know a couple of you are very aware, my second grader is on her 3rd device because they're old. And so we continue to have to turn them in because they are not supporting our students as best as we do need to. And I realize we're working our way back to school, but I want to hear if there can be some consideration for those 2 measures. And then I do have some other questions as well.
Let me, Chairman Anderson, let me take the first one, and I'm trying to see here. I don't believe we have owned with us, but we have some additional Title I dollars that we're looking at sharing with schools to provide additional supports to them, whether it may be for sub coverage or monitor coverage or supporting parent liaisons. and we can get you a little bit more detail around that. We do have some carryover Title I funding, and we're going to look at how we can best support our Title I schools. Your other question was on the technology. Mr. Smith, can you kind of give the board a little update on what we're doing, convening that team around the whole pre-K through 2 device piece, and we think we may have a recommendation?
Certainly. As Ms. Burden shared earlier, we're looking at how we can utilize our CF funds most appropriately. And so we're looking to see if we could possibly get computers in by the end of the year to purchase those individual elementary devices with that funding. Where we are now is that we know that as we look at more computers for the system, we think about this under the umbrella of FCPS on, or whether we're just purchasing more computers. We implemented FCPS on at the middle schools, and then we developed a plan to distribute the remaining devices to our elementary students so that we can ensure that we have the appropriate number of devices for virtual learning in the fall. We still need to bring back and have that conversation with the board about where the board is with expanding FCPS on fully to the elementary school and what that financial outlay might be. We are looking at what the most appropriate device would be for our elementary students in pre-K through 2nd grade, which most likely would be some type of tablet and or Chromebook device. And then looking at expanding our current Dell laptops to our 3rd, 4th, and the remaining of our 5th grade students. So it's number one, looking at funding sources. Number two, thinking about where this fits in the board's overall philosophy on FCPS on as we expand it out, and then being able to bring that back to the board. The superintendent could always bring a recommendation back to purchase additional devices. It's just a matter of where the board would want to be on purchasing those devices.
Thank you for that, Mr. Smith. I would also share with my colleagues, and I know many of you understand this point, that COVID-19 has forced our hand regarding FCPS on. And despite efforts to return students back to school, we still have to realize and to be cognizant that we are still in a pandemic, and we will have opportunities to bring, not opportunities, there will be times where students will have to go back home because of closures, et cetera, because that's what we're planning for. And I want us to be ready for that. And if we have opportunities in our budget to have this conversation now, I definitely want to add that as one of my next steps. Because again, I know a couple of us as parents with the children in the younger grades are seeing that the devices that they do have are not measuring up. And this is not even speaking to younger kids, kindergarten through 1st, whose devices are not even the most appropriate for them at this time. So I would like to add those to my next steps and have some consideration there. My question, Dr. Brabrand, you said very quickly regarding providing support for the Title I schools. Do we have room to use some of the cafeteria staff to help support the work of the parent liaisons? I don't know if that's been investigated.
Without having Leona here, I would have to check in with her. The cafeteria staff obviously have many opportunities for roles they can play to support schools. I have to go back with her to see whether they also have some skill sets to help with being a parent liaison and communicating with families around certain issues. So I can find out from Leona and bring a later update. We want to be sure as we give people opportunities for work and rotate them into other positions that they're also trained to do the work in a way that will be mutually beneficial, of course, to serving our students and parents, and that they feel prepared and confident to do the work. And the parent liaison job, in some cases, requires some important skill sets that we need to be sure our food and nutrition folks have training and supports and confidence to do. But I'll follow up with Leona and get you some additional info on that.
Thank you. And that makes a lot of sense. I would hope that we're matching the skill set with the positions, but I'm I'm hopeful that we'll have some matches there. Glad to hear regarding using nutrition staff for temperature and monitors. Just one last question, Ms. Marion, so I don't need to go back. Mr. Smith, the Cox family plans that we talked about previously, can you provide a quick update on that for us?
So I don't have an update on that right now, but we can certainly provide a board an update on our numbers with the Cox program. We know that we've had several families take advantage of the program and are working directly with those families who currently have MiFis, if they are eligible for the program, to transition them from MiFi uses to the Cox program. So I'll work with Mr. Sethi to get an update on our overall usage.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Keys-Gamarra, followed by Ms. Cohen.
Thank you. I apologize for that snafu. I looked at it backwards, I guess, some sort of dyslexia or something. I want to go back to the comment regarding the 8.6 million for cameras for concurrent teaching. Can I get a breakdown on what that is covering? Is that all of our classrooms? Is that for a specific section of our schools? Ms. Burden?
As my understanding is those are cameras for 14,200 classrooms. Mr. Sethi may have more detailed information.
That's practically every classroom, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. I want to say that, Marty, can you check me on that? I believe that's almost every classroom in Fairfax. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I guess I would wonder, in light of the conversations we've had, what would be the reasoning as to why it would be almost all of the classrooms, or are we excluding a certain section, a set of students, or what are we doing?
No, actually, I don't think we're excluding any. We wanted to be sure that as we were exploring the models that we had the potential to be able to cover every classroom with some additional technology, including these cameras, to support a concurrent model. It may come back that not every classroom model at every level needs that, and we'll update that information when we bring you the updated report in November. But we didn't want to shortchange and not have the dollars for the technology if we needed it in every classroom. The 14,200 is the total number of classrooms. That's what I was just asking Mr. Smith to verify, and it was.
Right, and I didn't know that answer, so that was the reason for the question.
Sure.
So sure. My question is, we had a lot of discussion about concurrent teaching last week. And I'm wondering, have we identified other equipment that would be needed besides these cameras? What is the planning for that? And whether the cost of those cameras, was that covered by some of the COVID funds we were able to get?
Yeah, I'll let Ms. Burden speak to the last question about covering. We are looking at some other things, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, in addition to cameras, for audio enhancement. Mm-hmm. For the speaking of the teacher in the classroom. And so that is going to be part of our pilot to look. All of our renovated schools, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, have enhanced audio already built in, and Mr. Plattenberg can speak to that. But as we're doing this concurrent pilots and we're looking at this model, we want to make sure that the audio piece is not a challenge. So, Jeff, I don't know if you wanted to speak to the renovation, or Mr. Sethi or Marty to the audio enhancement technology that we're reviewing.
Yeah, well, I can speak to the fact that during the renovation, we put audiological enhancement within all of our individual instructional spaces because of one of the biggest things that have been found. The research has shown that the biggest strain has been on teacher voices. And that's been historically over time. So that's included as part of our educational specifications, and during any renovation, we also provide for that.
And we're looking at a variety of cameras as part of our pilots, and we're also having conversations about document cameras if teachers might need them as well.
So I guess the basis of my question is, if we're thinking of doing a concurrent model, and I know that the board seemed to be split on that issue. Are we covering those needs in this budget that we're seeing today, or are we looking at additional costs that are not included?
So we have taken into account in our current CARES funding, as we looked at the funding from the state, or I'm sorry, funding from the county, moving as much of those technology costs into the monies that we've gotten from the state and the county.
I'm not sure whether that answered my question. I was asking, have we sat down or has staff sat down and said, if we do concurrent, what do we need? And if so, what are those costs? And are those costs included in what we're looking at the proposed first quarterly budget right now? Are they included? If not, please tell us what else would be necessary.
On just technology things?
I was thinking technology, but if there are other needs, I think we need to know what that is.
Yeah, Marty, my answer, and Marty, please add, my answer, cameras we've covered, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. We've got all the classrooms. The audio enhancements, we got them in all of our renovated buildings, and we need to see how much audio enhancement is an issue for teachers in terms of them wanting it or needing it to run the concurrent well. I don't think every teacher, even in schools, honestly, when I was in another school division where we had it, some teachers loved it and wanted to use it every day. And some teachers are like, I don't need that microphone. My voice projects fine. Kids can hear me on the computer and kids can hear me in the classroom. So some of that's individual taste. I don't know, Marty, if we baked in all of the audio, but we still have some unallocated dollars that you saw in today's presentation. As you know, our report's coming to you in the next 2 weeks, or 2 or 3 weeks, November 12th, and the deadlines are for the end of December. So if there is additional needs to make the concurrent run well, and that remains that remains my recommendation as an indispensable part of how we're going to return to school, we would absolutely share those additional needs with the board and would give you that information.
So I guess as my next step, I would ask that we, to the best of our knowledge, and I know there are other jurisdictions who are proposing this model, that we can identify what those needs are so that the board can make an informed decision as we're looking at that issue.
Yeah, we can bring you the additional. Reports, and we'll be glad the additional detail. We can do that. We can include that in our interim report to the board. And yes, we can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. Ms. Cohen, and then followed by that will be Ms. Pekarsky, I believe, and she's not spoken yet.
Thank you very much, Ms. Marin. Just a few questions I think that might help folks at home. I think some folks have trouble with the timeline. So if you don't mind just giving us some more information of how this is going to be for the concurrent tech and kind of all the pieces in play. How will this be understood, ordered, and then in place by the start of our big cohorts? And maybe just a little bit more explanation. I'm not sure that folks necessarily understand what an RFP is. And so I think there was definitely some heartburn when people saw that the RFP for the cameras, the big order, just went out last Friday. So if you don't mind just explaining to folks sort of what that process looks like and kind of what the time frame is.
So Marty or Lee, on the RFP, I would need a little help from you. Ms. Cohen, on the models themselves, the models will include cameras, the existing laptop cameras. So one of the things with the concurrent model is there are levels to the implementation of it, right? It's my plan that we may begin at one level of expectation around the concurrent model and the tools associated with that. And we can then continue to build and scaffold on it as we go through the school year with additional enhancements to the model to support teachers in the classrooms. But we're running the pilots all this week, all next week. We've had great initial, even in the last 2 days, great initial reports. But there's levels of being able to do the concurrent model, and technology can help enhance it, but it's not something that requires us to have all of it immediately to be able to do the concurrent model. Especially, and one of the things that I recognized last week I could have done better is explain the concurrent model in better detail. We hadn't used even that language of concurrent very well. I think one of the things that even got lost is back in the summer when we were asking folks to make choices, we had a hybrid model and we had the virtual model. And then, and again, part of my own communication, which I'm responsible for, when we went all virtual, we gave everybody those 4 days of teacher-led instruction. And the concurrent model is the only model, and we're keeping an equity at center of all that we do, keeps that opportunity to have a teacher and a student connected, daily connected for those 4 days. So that can happen with just the laptop camera. It can happen with additional cameras. It can happen with additional audio enhancement. And one of the things our staff is working on right now is helping provide what those scaffolds and levels are for each level. Pre-K through 2, 3 through 6th grade, and even secondary. Some of them, of course, as you know, with the timeline, we have more. The biggest group is coming back right now, K through 2nd grade. And we'll be bringing you additional updates. I plan to bring the board some additional updates even later this week. But we don't need all of it to begin at sort of the intro level. We can use some of the things that are on order to enhance the model as we move through the year. And one last thing I do want to say, Chairman Anderson made a reference to it. We're trying to bring you, and I did not express it probably well enough at the midnight hour, we're trying to bring you a model that can exist next month, next semester, and honestly, next year and beyond. And that's part of what we're trying to do here is scale up, not just for the next few months, but really for the next few years on a model that can work for our students and staff. So thank you.
I think, Ms. Darren at Fairfax, I think your mic is on, so we're getting a lot of feedback. In addition to my dogs barking.
Okay. Texter is coming.
Okay, thanks. No, I appreciate that. I will definitely say, you know, the advocacy that I'm getting from folks about a real concern about compromise of the virtual model. I just want to throw that on the radar. Today is not the day for that, which I totally understand. And so I think, again, the details of how the process works, and maybe that's a question for another day when you describe the various pilots, because we haven't heard exactly what those are going to look like. So I'm totally assuming that if we're saying the laptop camera is sufficient, then we're doing a model of a pilot then that's just using that. And so I think maybe you're right that this is right for a conversation that's outside of the budget of like just giving folks some greater clarity on pilots. In terms of the process that when we're talking about trying to use the COVID money to make these purchases, I guess some of my advocacy would certainly be around these cameras. I think generally we've had these conversations. I agree with you about the idea that we are looking long range and how we can change some things. I'm not disagreeing with that at all. We also have heard a lot of advocacy around individual HEPA filtration units for those classrooms that have no outside ventilation opportunities. And so I didn't know if Mr. Plattenberg was able to speak to that. And then the only other piece I wanted to add in trying to capture maybe what was said previously is
I do think it's been really incredible to watch our food and nutrition service providers and the relationships that they've developed with families during grab and go. And so I think even when we talk about trying to help support some of our principals with reconfirming choices, those are some opportunities maybe where we can empower our folks who've had these relationships to even at least be giving them a piece of paper to explain what needs to happen, or the role of the parents in helping reconfirm. And it's been remarkable, and our food service workers have been unbelievable. I just wanted to say that while Maria was on the call.
Thanks, Ms. Cohen. Let me let Jeff start with the filters. Jeff, can you, I think we did a little bit of an update on that just the other week. Could you reshare some of the work we've done with the HEPA?
Yeah, so what we've done is, as I've said before, we have over 220 facilities. And as you've known, the 27 million square feet of space includes 37,000 pieces of HVAC equipment. And as I mentioned previously, in that we have over 5,000 different models of HVAC equipment and more than 45,000 active air filters. So what we've done, and as I said earlier, over 800 different sizes, we change our filters every 90 days. That's over 180,000 per year. Well, the ASHRAE ventilation rates recommended for as a part of the CDC requirements, and they have the link on their website. If you look under ventilation, the CDC, the latest guidelines, has a link to the ASHRAE qualifications for it. And the ASHRAE came out with an updated circular regarding ventilation rates recommended to address this pandemic and the virus. And so what they recommend is 15 CFM in each room, right? And that's cubic feet per minute. That's what CFM stands for, per occupant. Well, our average is 15 on a regular basis for institutional facilities. And we checked every one of our schools. We did samples in spaces within each of our schools to ensure that our schools were operating within the ASHRAE recommendations for ventilation rates. In addition, you have heard on the news reports where they talk about poor ventilation and potential spread for virus of the air exchange. And what it refers to is poor ventilation. And they say this example in a poorly ventilated building shows, and they show graphics of different color spread through, and even in normal buildings, okay? But the ones that most of us are used to seeing talk about poorly ventilated buildings. Our air exchange is approximately 6 to 10 air exchanges per hour within our spaces. That's really good, because the example that was given in the news was, and the articles that some of you have shared with me, was saying that you should have up to 6 per hour, where most of ours are even better than. In fact, our temporary buildings, the ones with the barred units, have a minimum of approximately 10 air exchanges per hour, or approximately 15 to 20 CFM per person, closer to 20. And what does 20 mean? Well, 20, if you look at a hospital room is usually about 25 CFM, right? So but we don't have, when you talk about a surgery room within an OR emergency room, in the OR, they have what's called negative air pressure, right? So that's why we don't have negative air pressure within our facilities. What does that mean? That means that all of the air that's pumped into that space is evacuated out of that space and not redistributed. So basically, to answer this long story short, we did an assessment of all of our facilities to make sure that we were going ahead and improving and providing the recommended MERV 15 filters where we could procure them, because they're a hot item right now, and where we were able to use them. We addressed the fact that we needed to have proper air ventilation, which we do, and air circulation, which we do. And for those spaces where we might have issues or clashes, regardless of what we have done, we will be able to utilize some of the pieces of equipment that we bought, the air purifiers, the HEPA filters, and we have on order that are anticipated to be delivered, as Ms. Burden was talking about with the COVID money, on order, the filters that basically I think you've seen recently that have the HEPA filter with the ultraviolet light within it. We are continuing to investigate ultraviolet lighting in some of our larger units. However, that has a longer lead time and so forth, and it really looks to be problematic, and that's why we've been procuring the individual packs themselves. I know I keep going on and on when I talk about this, but it's an important item, and it's one that people are really concerned about. So I hope I've addressed your questions.
The other, I think, Ms. Cohen, was around food and nutrition. Lee or Marty, do you want to answer that?
I'm sorry, I missed the question. What was the question?
Yeah, I don't think that necessarily. I was trying to give a compliment to Maria and her staff and just say that I hope when we're thinking about supporting, especially the reconfirming choices, that we will be able to use some of the relationships that our grab and go folks have made with the community since March. So no questions to be answered. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do that.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Cohen. Yeah, we'll look at that, and thank you for giving them a shout out. They really have done just an outstanding job, and I really appreciate everything Maria Brown has done as director of FNS in a most challenging time. So thank you.
And Ms. Cohen, if I could, I'd like to go back and answer your question about the cameras. You talked about the RFP or the IFB that's currently out there. It's an invitation for a bid. And so we have that out for the next couple of weeks. We have been in contact with some tech companies regarding these cameras, and it's been difficult to nail down numbers because they won't necessarily give us delivery times without knowing how many cameras we want. And so as we think about maximizing our ability to get cameras, we put out an IFB for virtual cameras, and we'll close that at the end of October and look at the bids that we get. And that's based on some of the camera models that we're using. Once we are able to see what the bids are, nail down what some of the recommendations are from the pilot, we'll then be able to reach out to start talking about delivery times. We do know that anytime we're talking about thousands of technology devices, it's always going to take some time. And we would begin deploying those devices as soon as we would get them in.
Thanks, Marty. That's super helpful. I appreciate that.
Okay, I believe next we have Ms. Pekarsky. Am I correct? Or Ms. Corbett-Sanders, had you already spoken once? I believe you kicked us off.
Yes, I'm on a go back. Ms. Pekarsky goes before me.
Great, thank you. So Ms. Pekarsky, then Ms. Corbett-Sanders, then Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think Megan is next, actually. She's the first go back. I'm confused. So Ms. Pekarsky, please go ahead and we'll figure out if it's Ms. Corbett-Sanders or Ms. McLaughlin next. Thank you.
Okay, great. I just have one question and then one comment. Question about quantity of PPE. How long is the PPE that, we've set funds aside for purchasing slated to last? What are we looking at? I mean, is this something I guess we could buy and save as we start to phase in as well?
Yeah, we originally, purchased 200,000 reusable cloth masks for adult size and 100,000 student size, because many of our high school students will wear the adult size, which is why we have such a larger amount. And, 1.5 million of disposable masks, about 57,000 of clear cloth face masks, adult face shields, 50,000 of those, disposable gowns, everything that we thought we would need. But it will depend on when we return to school. And then, we don't have any usage data to be able to say, well, this is how much we'll run through in a given week. It's going to depend on how many people are in the building and that sort of thing. But the allowable uses of the CARES grant and the coronavirus relief funds allow us to have 2 months in supply at any given time. So we are going to try to ramp up those allocations further with these funds.
And I would just say kudos to Michelle Pratt and our procurement department for being as forward thinking as they were at the beginning of the pandemic to begin ordering many of these supplies so that we were in good stead.
Ms. Pekarsky, this is Dr. Brabrand. Just in plain speaking, I think a wild card is how many kids are going to bring their own mask? We're going to embrace the mask culture, and how many kids are going to want the school to apply them, or going to have to be reminded to wear them each day, and here's another mask again. You know, this is the great unknown, right? Kids that pencil and paper in the old days. Many kids brought their pencil and paper to school. Some kids needed, of course, for good reason, needed to be supplied that. And some kids just forgot it. And so knowing how that's going to play with the mask is still one of those things that we're just going to have to assess. We've got 2 months in stockpile. As you just heard, Ms. Burden's going to look at whether we can run that number up a bit more. And then we're just going to have to follow usage totals and try to keep some money in reserve if we find that the totals are going beyond what we have stockpiled for use.
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about, as well as, you know, actually being able to order and so forth. Anyway, the other thing, the comment that I wanted to make, and I almost can't believe I'm advocating for this, but I do want to echo Dr. Anderson's comments when it comes to the devices for our younger kids. I mean, whether or not we like it, we can have the discussion about FCPS on, but the reality is we have many students who are, you know, on devices that are old, that have issues, that inconvenience families, that cause disruption when there are glitches. And our kids need the best tools possible. So if there is possibility to use these funds to replenish some of these, I would absolutely like us to do that as soon as possible, have the discussion so that we're not left with a, you know, oh, we could have ordered maybe a little sooner, but now they're just not going to be available.
I'll be glad to review that with Marty and Lee and share it at chairs tomorrow as a potential future action item for this board.
Thank you, Dr. Berger. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Pekarsky. Okay, I think I got confused. It's I believe, or go back. And then Ms. Corbett Sanders, I believe you raised your hand. Is that accurate?
It is accurate. I do have to go back, but Ms. Sizemore-Heiser also has to go back, and she's got a time constraint. So she asked if she could switch with me, Ms.
Sure thing. So Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. Okay, great. So go ahead, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the flexibility of my colleagues, Ms. McLaughlin and Ms. Corbett Sanders. I really thank you very much, both of you. I'll be very brief. I just had two questions. One, I want to piggyback on what Ms. Pekarsky said. As someone with a high school student whose laptop was so slow, I had to replace it, and I have the privilege of being able to do that. I would really echo that something we're going to be in some sort of world like this long-term, potentially given COVID, or at least the uncertainty, and we need to have the best devices. So I'm going to just put that out there. My quick question I didn't get a chance to ask on my first round was about, I didn't see anything in our budget or a conversation about, have we been saving any money from not using substitute teachers? I know, for example, in virtual learning, teachers can go 3 days asynchronous. At least I recall that from a conversation before needing to get a sub. And even as we're keeping most of our kids virtual for a while, I'm just curious where that savings is going, if there's
Yes,
any.
Marsha. Yes, we are saving on subs. And Ms. Burden, do we have a current idea of what this savings rate looks like? The answer is yes, and I think our substitute fill rate has been 99%, Rachna, thus far.
It's on page 8 of the PowerPoint presentation. The first quarter savings of substitutes and temporary hourly is $2.6 million. But, you know, and that's just what we're seeing in the first quarter compared to the subs that we would have used last year in the first quarter. But you can't multiply that by 4, and because once we go back to school, we may need even more subs. So for now, that's the savings that we're seeing in the substitute and temporary hourly counts.
Thank you. And I apologize, I missed that. That was my question. And I'm assuming that are we saving some of that to budget for extra subs going forward, or is that just kind of getting subsumed into all of our savings as we're looking at additional costs that we need to run school during COVID? Is it being earmarked, I guess is what I'm asking, or is it just kind of going into the general fund of?
I would say at this point, we're not recognizing that any savings at this point, and so we would wait until mid-year to actually recognize any savings that we would see. So this was merely an update for the board so that the board could see where we are in the first quarter, and then we will have some decisions to make at the mid-year review.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you for this nice report and the information. I appreciate all your hard work. That was it. Thank you, Ms. Marin.
Okay, next we actually have Ms. Darnette Kofax, followed by Ms. Corbett Sanders. Thank you everyone for helping me keep it straight.
Thanks. All my questions have been answered. Being able to share with Melanie, this update with you and working with Lee yesterday, Lee and Scott and Marty. So, but I just wanted for my colleagues' sakes to you understand where my concerns were yesterday. They were with how to repurpose our food service workers and to make certain, because I guess I asked this yesterday, on average, our most meals were 66,000 even during a good year. Is that correct?
During a regular
good year, but I mean on average, I think that was the number. Like we reached a high, and that's where we normally, that's our high normally.
Yeah, in a regular day, pre-COVID, we would serve, 81,000 lunch and 30,000 breakfast for a total of about 111,000 breakfast and lunch combined. Some free and reduced, some paid. That's the total, 111,000.
Okay. And when you distribute the grab and go meals for a week, are you able to then allocate those back on a day-by-day basis so you can add those to your total count that way? Meaning, like we're here, we're trying to get credit for these meals from the federal government program in order for our reimbursement, and they have a threshold. And if we're doing these group meals, if you will, how do you account for that?
They count as 7 breakfasts and 7 lunches.
Okay.
We are able to account for all meals that we distribute except for the adult meals with the seek reimbursement from the federal government.
Okay. I had several questions, and I thank Mr. Plattenberg for his explanation on our HVAC systems and where we are and how he feels we are at a good point for high air quality. So thank you for that. And I do have a question about the cameras. When do we anticipate those? When will the first batch come in? And could you give us a little bit more details what they will look like? What will be their features that will make them ideal for this concurrent learning?
Marty, do you want to go ahead and share some feedback about that?
So we don't have a date yet on when the first cameras would come in. We haven't yet ordered the cameras. And so again, it's all based on availability. And we know that as Ms. Burden has shared with us, that it is harder to get cameras than it is to get gloves at this point. And it was at one time very hard to get rubber gloves or latex gloves. So we are hoping to get cameras in as soon as possible. But again, it's working with our vendors to see what their availability might be for those cameras. In terms of what they look like, we are piloting a variety of cameras. They are cameras that will sit on the desk with a bit of a wand that comes out of the camera with a camera and with a microphone, and that will provide a fishbowl view of the classroom and that the teacher can be seen very easy and very clearly on student devices. And again, we're looking at a variety of cameras, checking to see how much bandwidth they might use on the system, wanting to ensure that we get devices that are also easy to use. We know that we don't want devices that take multiple steps for teachers to connect to their laptops, and that might be cumbersome to use. So we're looking at ease of use, the number of options available for virtual learning. And again, once we get through our pilots, we'll have more information to share with our vendors.
Was that the extent of your question, Mr. Hernán-Koufax?
Sorry. I wanted to follow up on what he said. I asked, do you have these cameras currently in your possession for these upcoming pilots?
Yes, we've been able to procure cameras for our pilots. And so we are using those cameras in our pilot classrooms.
Thank you.
Okay, next I have Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ms. Marin. And I'm going to really focus on the technology piece now. I did appreciate Ms. Tolan's recommendation of taking some of the savings that we have and investing in bandwidth. I think that's going to be especially important given the presentation that we had last week about our teaching models and whether or not we have sufficient bandwidth inside our buildings. So thank you for that. But I do want to talk a little bit about our devices and the availability of the devices in general and in particular for our youngest learners. We were told in September that there may be a challenge in devices because of a insufficient number or a number of devices not being returned after last year. So I would like to know what the budgetary impact is of those devices not being returned. But more importantly, I'd like to drill down on the next piece, which is the devices for our youngest learners. Pre-K through second grade, and then also devices for our students with special needs. In the project management plan, we were told that there would be an RFP out in October for those devices for the youngest learners. And that was based on the support from this board, both last spring as well as in subsequent updates, that we were supportive of getting a one-to-one device for all students. So if you could give me a status check and more details, and if you need a secondary affirmation, I would like to have that affirmation today to get those devices. So based on that, if someone can give me some responses. Thank you.
So I'll let Mr. Sethi talk about the devices. I know that he's been working with the group in doing some of that assessment and identifying what those devices might be. And he's had some recommendations on what those devices might be. And I would ask for more clarification on the devices that were not returned and what the budgetary impact might be. I know that our students were able to return devices, and we put those devices back into our inventory for student use. We do know that we were able to, again, set aside some devices. We were able to provide devices for our instructional assistants and are working to, with the remaining inventory, do some backfill and break fix for those devices that might not be working appropriately. So at this point, we have devices in inventory. But again, as we look at expanding to third grade, fourth grade, the remainder of fifth grade, would look at purchasing more devices so that we would have enough for all of our students and have some in reserve for break fix.
So that's not quite everything I asked for. So I let Mr. Sethi respond, and then perhaps we can get some clarification. Thank you.
I can certainly speak to the device conversation. I understand we distributed a lot of our devices out to every student when we originally went out for the pandemic, and there is while there is some inventory available, there is still a demand for having additional, extra computers in classrooms or schools so we can continue to support big fixes, challenges with the devices. One strategy we are pursuing, which we can act on pretty quickly, we know what teacher laptops we procure every year. And there is the need, as Leah had mentioned in the presentation, for the teacher refresh to happen this year. We're trying to see if we can accelerate that, and that will bring back 4,000 laptops from the teachers, which can be used to provide extra supplies in the classroom. So if they needed to have additional stock of computers just for the temporary part. So that's one strategy. The other big question around student computers for pre-K to 2, the simple solution could be potentially to buy the kind of computers we have on FCPS on right now. We all understand that may not be the best outcome for a 2 to 5 year roadmap for what we want to do. So there's obviously opportunities to look at the tablets, as Mr. Smith was talking about. There's Chromebooks, which also are touch devices, which can be used. The question which I think I'm hearing from the district is, how do we build consensus in our staff and our principal groups to say, this is the tool we need, or be able to write an RFP which kind of focuses on a tool. I think it's a matter of time to write the RFP, which captures the essence of what we need to do in the classroom at the PK2 level. This is my understanding, being kind of new on the ground, and certainly prefer if there is other previous thinking which I may not be aware of.
So to be clear then, what you're saying is that the item in the project management plan, which called for the release of an RFP for the appropriate device for pre-K through 2, is not in play anymore, that instead you have pushed a pause button and are trying to figure out what to do?
I need to understand, I do not know about the project management plan as yet. And Marty, if you had a sense of.
No, it's the sense of developing the requirements for the RFP. So pulling the team together, and as Mr. Tetty was saying, that looking at all of our stakeholders and getting input from our stakeholder groups around what the most appropriate requirements would be for the device, so that we can work toward getting that RFP out. Many of the staff who are involved in many of these processes have been engaged in other things since the beginning of the year as it relates to IT. But again, the teams are talking. Our tech action teams are talking about the types of devices that would be most appropriate, and are working to pull those requirements together so that we can develop the RFP. So the discussion is not off the table. We are working to pull that information together.
So what I would like as the next step is a revised timeline for that, because we were, this board was told that it would happen in October, and I'm a bit concerned. And then just for a point of clarification, Mr. Smith, when you asked about the device, when I asked about the devices not being returned, on the 11th of September, the board was notified that that we were having a delay in providing a roll down of devices down into the 3rd through 6th grade because of devices not being returned. And so what I'm trying to understand is, what is the budgetary implications for that? And do we need to do something, especially with the CARES Act funding being somewhat challenged, that we have to expend by the end of this year? We need to find a way of accelerating that technology buy to address these needs. And I would suggest that we might even need to do something this week, just so that we can get things delivered.
Yes, and so that's when I said that Dr. Brabrand could bring a recommendation forward for purchasing additional devices. Back to the September 11th discussion about roll down, that's when we were at the beginning of our processes of rolling computers down. We know now that our students have access to those devices. We were, in a sense, giving the board an update so that if questions did arise from families, that you would have information to share that we were pushing those devices out. What we do know is that our students have devices. We provided access for those students. And again, we do have that inventory in place. And as Mr. Setti said, we could certainly add to that inventory if we rolled our teacher devices down. And we also know that we have reached out to our vendors to see the availability of devices, if we could possibly get them in by the end of the year, given some of the constraints that we have with the federal dollars. So we'll know more on Thursday whether or not those devices would be available. And based on that availability, we'll be talking to Dr. Brabrand about bringing a recommendation forward to the board.
Well, given the date of today's date and Thursday's date being October 22nd, I respectfully request that we have a budget estimates and a plan so that we can make a decision this week, because the next time this board meets puts us into November and we are just on a very short fuse.
No, I certainly agree, and we can pull that together for you.
Thank you.
So is that something then that would go onto our meeting agenda? Or
yes, Ms. Marin, it would have to go on our meeting agenda. And I think it's critical that we have to do some way of green lighting a purchase. Thank you.
So thank you, Ms. Corbett-Sanders. So Ms. Mulberg, are you able to adjust that agenda or flag it for chairs?
Yes, of course.
Thank you so much. Okay, next is Ms. McLaughlin, followed by Dr. Anderson.
Thank you, Ms. Marin. Mr. Sethi, could you speak a little bit more to the response to Ms. Corbett-Sanders' questions regarding the project management plan and how it relates to the IT department's work surrounding all of this in terms of our COVID and virtual learning?
As it relates to the PK-12 or PK-2 devices, or you're thinking broadly?
Just broadly about everything we're talking about here today, budget-wise. I'm trying to just get a sense of how you're utilizing that project management plan to drive our device purchases and rollout.
So I have a few things in motion right now, as Marty had mentioned. We are certainly looking at procuring devices which we can, i.e. the teacher laptops, to help backfill the device needs. We have procured the cameras for the pilot, which will go into the classrooms to support teaching in different models, whether that's they're using the whiteboard or whether they're using it to kind of project themselves into the virtual classroom or the concurrent instruction model. Beyond that, there is support for the MiFi devices, which go into the student homes. There's obviously support for COX to kind of get set up for students to get remote access. Those were sort of the big coverage areas. And if I may add, there's a little bit of a desire, which is may not be on the project plan, given the series of incidents in the last few weeks, to see if we took some of those dollars to strengthen up the cybersecurity posture. And I think the finance team and everybody is kind of looking towards, are those dollars allocatable towards cybersecurity in terms of the virtual connections of bringing students and teachers in working from home. And that may be another option for us to be able to use those dollars to strengthen our cybersecurity across the board for staff and students. I'm sorry, you're muted.
Oh, thank you. I know that you only recently joined us within the last month, but I was curious if you've had time to study the project management plan. Are you finding you're able to revise it based on your own leadership assessments? That's certainly been a really important part for the board.
Absolutely. I have to confess, I've been through a series of documents right now. It's a little bit of drinking from the fire hydrant, so to say. And cybersecurity was taking a lot of time up front. I don't have a direct recall of the project management plan right now, but the work is definitely aligned because I'm working with the rest of the IT team, and they are obviously engaged in that process. So they keep informing about things we needed to focus on, things we need to kind of bring up front. If you give me some time, I'll go back and kind of make sure that I line that up with the current expectations and demands.
Of course. Thank you so much, Mr. Sethi. In terms of my colleagues, the other things that I just wanted to make sure everyone maybe considers, and maybe Dr. Brabrand, you and Mr. Smith can speak to this. I'm seeing a lot of photo images of New York public schools where out in Long Island, they're using the plexiglass shields around on the individual student desks. But I don't recall that we've really been hearing about that from our staff. So can somebody speak to how that is part of or not part of our PPE purchases?
Sure, Ms. McLaughlin, and I'll let Marty or Jeff add in. What we shared with you already is we're going to have plexiglass shields for every teacher in every classroom. That was in the County CARES Act funding that you approved a couple of months ago. Remember that our plan is 6 foot social distancing wherever possible. We're planning to space the desk out 6 feet apart. I don't know. I haven't reviewed the specifics of the New York to see whether they've gone less than 6 feet and are using the plexiglass as a mitigation strategy to put more kids in the classroom. I haven't seen that. I'd have to go back. I did ask our local affiliate teacher association that has connections in New York for a copy of their plan, and I can go back and review that document to see whether they did that with less than 6 feet. It's certainly something we can look at. And again, Mr. Smith, if you know differently than what I've shared, please say. But we've got money for supports for a teacher plexiglass in every classroom. We haven't done it for every kid. What we have is a 6 foot social distancing, and whether we would do some sort of combination. Let me say this, as we go longer into this, longer into COVID, and we try to get to operational level 4, I think it will be a discussion to have as we see what was happening in other school districts, not just the strategies, but like Leah said, how well does the mitigation keep COVID low or almost non-existent in schools? And we're going to have to see how different combinations of strategies yield to different levels of COVID cases in our schools. But Mr. Smith, anything to add to my comments?
No, I would just add that we were following the CDC guidance with regard to the spacing that you talked about in face coverings, and that if there is any additional guidance we should look at, we could certainly take a look at that. But based on that guidance, we felt that our mitigating factors were good enough.
Dr. Braber, I appreciate the response. I will just reiterate to all my colleagues that this is why I've been saying from the very beginning, study other school systems that are back online, what they're doing. And I think that the student plexiglass shields, we should absolutely know if that's more effective than 6 feet apart with a mask. I really appreciate, I know, Dr. Braber, and you're willing to take that feedback.
Absolutely. And let me tell you just on that, I've been talking to the superintendent in Virginia Beach. They are doing some 3 foot as their default in several classrooms. And he and I are in regular conversation. I'm going to be looking at their data to see what that looks like. And they're, of course, remember, it's got to be their mitigation strategies where it's not as easy for me to inspect their hand washing, their sanitation, their custodial cleaning. But I am interested in those districts, even in Virginia, that are going less than 6 feet. There are a couple of them, only a couple of them that I can find, but one that is reasonably comparable to us is Virginia Beach. They're 3 times smaller, but they're still a pretty big system. And I'm going to be looking at that data that Aaron has, and I'll bring any recommendations to the board during the year as I compare it to what we're doing here with our model.
Thank you. I will try my best right now to type in the next step request about the plexiglass around students. I think we should absolutely know what we're finding from public health experts, if that's more effective than 6 feet and masks alone. So thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think finally we have one more member who wants to ask questions, Dr. Anderson.
I'm so sorry. I didn't expect to have a go back, but I wanted to piggyback a little bit on what Ms. Corbett Sanders was just talking about. And I have to apologize. My reception today is not very good, so it's very likely that I'm asking a question that was talked about, but I could not get the audio to work for me. Dr. Brabrand or Mr. Smith, did I hear that you are needing for the board to give you some consensus or some direction regarding the procurement of devices for our K-2?
I think during this call, during this meeting, the conversation I've heard is, can we expedite a recommendation? And to be honest, I've had some very just brief back and forth with Mr. Smith. We're going to take a look at whether we can put something on the table in front of you by the end of this week at your Thursday meeting. But I can't speak to it with definitiveness now unless Mr. Smith already knows the answer, and I'm not sure he does. But we certainly heard the feedback about getting computers for our elementary kids. Mr. Smith, if you want to add anything, but I'd certainly talk about it with you tomorrow, Chairman Anderson at Chairs.
Okay.
You've covered it.
Okay, that probably was the part that I missed, but I just wanted to be sure if you were needing some guidance from the board today to help expedite this, because I know that procurement it's an issue at this time. So if there were to be, if we were needing to put a motion on the table for the board to to consider,
I'd bring it to Chairs tomorrow. Yes, if I think that's necessary, I'll bring it to Chairs tomorrow and have it so that the board could review it on Thursday and take an action.
Okay, so that's fine. So you're saying no motion for today, but we will pick up that conversation on Thursday.
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Anna Koufax, did you want to say something?
Well, yeah, I do want to speak to that because that was the first question, as you recall, Ms. Mayor, that I asked yesterday. And I guess, Dr. Brabrand, yesterday I was told that the reason we weren't doing this is, because I expressed my same concerns about needing, hardware for elementary school kids, as did so many of my colleagues. Yesterday, the answer that was given to me was that we're not certain because it has to be in hand, number one. And then our CARES money is monies that can be used next year through 2022. So I guess my question is, what's changed between yesterday and today?
I don't remember what was shared with you yesterday in that meeting, Ms. Koufax. I did scoot a little early.
Well, I was guided that the monies that right now, because we need to have for this, we needed to have to use the funding that's put out on the table with a December deadline, that the hardware, the actual physical computers will not be the best use of that money because we could use that later on. And we had some things to decide whether or not for the youngest learners, they should be like an iPad or a touch screen, or so it's just a different answer given within 24 hours. So I'm just confused.
So I think that it's part of the same answer. It was really about Dr. Brabrand's ability to bring a recommendation back to the board and how quickly we would want to act upon that and which pots of money we could use. If we wanted to use the CRF funds, then of course we'd have to look to see if we could get those devices procured and actually receive those devices by the end of the year. If that was not possible, Dr. Brabrand could still bring a recommendation forward, and we could look at using some of our other pots of money based on that overall need. And yesterday, and as I shared today, it's that conversation about FCPS on and expanding that for the elementary schools. As Ms. Pekarsky shared in some of her comments, we would certainly want to have that discussion with the board and not just move forward with some of those decisions. And so Dr. Brabrand can bring that recommendation forward. It's just a matter of using certain pots of money to get things in by the end of the year, or using other pots of money to ensure that we can get devices out to students as quickly as we can after the end of the year.
Tammy, the other thing I'd say to you, and listen, I'm just being honest. Every day we're working 16 hours. I don't get to have meetings, and we're working to actually redesign our entire meeting structure where leadership team meets daily. We met weekly pre-COVID. We met every other day. We're moving daily meetings to try to keep up with the volume. But one of the things that you heard Mr. Sethi say, and I'm going to deep between now and tomorrow, is whether our short-term strategy, just more laptops, get them in, get fresh new laptops, right? That could then later be used for teacher replacement, but it helps our kids right now. And then finalize the best approach for the devices for kids pre-K2, of which there's a lot of feedback from our teachers and principals. Don't just slap another laptop in front of those kids. There's probably a different device that could be better used before we spend millions of dollars on that device for pre-K2. And, we've been working to pull a small group together. There's lots of opinions about what the device could or should be, and we need to wrap that up as quickly as possible in the midst of everything else we're doing to put to the board and say, yes, we think this is the best device for those youngest kids. But in short term, it may be just a better play to put a laptop, even though a new laptop is better than an old laptop, and then work on next year and beyond having the right device for the youngest kids in front of them. We can't get them now because of the ordering, the RFP. Again, we have existing contracts for laptops that we don't have with other vendors for these other tablets or other designs. Again, Chromebooks, what else? So that's my feedback. And I don't, I wasn't at the complete meeting yesterday. I'm sorry if you got an answer that left you.
Well, the answer more or less is that wouldn't be the right use of the money at this time. And, because that was the most logical way to use this money right now. And so while I appreciate, that things can change, I wouldn't expect them to change that quickly. So I am absolutely, I just as I spoke yesterday in the managers meeting, it's important that the most important thing during this time is to ensure that kids have good functioning technology, because even as we ramp up, we might have to pull back depending on where we are. So I guess I'm encouraged to hear that there's a change that maybe, and you may be bringing something else to us on Thursday. So I just wanted to point out that that was a little bit different. I was guided toward yesterday. So thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
At this point, I'd like to shift our focus over to the next steps document, because I don't believe that we reviewed that for the legislative program portion of our meeting. So Ms. Mulberger, can you please pull that up and we can just go through that and confirm? Thank you. And I'm not sure that any of them, perhaps just the last one, was budget related. So it might be important to distinguish that. But so I'm sorry, Ms. Mulberger, can you remind me, please, did we decide that, that we have been entering in our next steps as we go along so that they're as accurate as possible? Are we to read each one out loud here, or everyone just review and provide any feedback, and then we would take a consensus vote?
It's up to you, as long as you get a consensus of the board to support these.
Okay, so why don't we take a few minutes to review that, each of us. Like 2 or 3 minutes here. And just a reminder, these are next steps that will help inform our decision making about this topic.
Ms. Marin, I have a question.
Sure.
I'm finding when I'm trying to work on this document to look at both what I typed in and what others have typed in, that either it got cut off, but like Ms. Keys-Gamarra, it said in anticipation of need, including, and then I can't say anything else after that. Now I typed something on mine and I can't see the rest of what I typed in. So
Well,
I think Ms. Mulberg was trying to fix it just there. Like if you extend the box, we can actually.
Yeah, you just need to extend the width of the row there. I think that's accurate. It should be better now, I think.
Miss Marin, I just also extended the box and make all of the boxes a little larger on the original document, just FYI.
Yeah, thank you. I had done that piecemeal. Thanks. The only one that was very urgent was line 13 for Thursday's meeting. Is that accurate? Ms. Karen Corbett Sanders, yes.
That's in response to trying to get us back on track regarding the technology for our youngest learners, and that if they need us to have a motion on Thursday night, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But the other one that I have, which is the very top one, also has budgetary implications on the redeployment of our great staff into other areas if we aren't using them in their individual job categories.
I mean, are any of these, Ms. Burden, are any of these like considered budget questions that would go through that formal budget process?
No.
Or is it kind of one and the same?
I mean, they're next steps. I mean, budget questions are usually sent in individually. It's just a different process.
Okay. Okay, well, are there any questions about any of these questions in particular?
Ms. Marin?
Yeah.
I also wanted to share that I believe the item from line 12 now, because I took out an empty box from Ms. Corbett Sanders, it encompasses part of what I have on line 6. And I'm happy to merge the two and to take out the pieces for me that I think are duplicate.
That's fine with me. That makes sense. Thank you for catching that. Okay, I see a whole bunch of other hands. So everyone who's got their hand raised, you intend to ask a question or any of these leftovers from before? Okay.
I just wanted to ask the same thing just for trying to condense this for our staff. Ms. Keys-Gamarra, the additional cameras, can we add it up higher with the one that now it's out of my screen, I'm sorry. But the one, thank you so much, Ms. Mulberg, you're a gem. The one that says concurrent learning pilots about bandwidth, can we combine those two just to give staff a sense of, it's just what do we need to make this concurrent thing happen as a result of the pilot, I think was the goal of these groupings. Unless either maker has an issue, I'm just trying to condense as much as we can.
I don't, staff, I don't have an objection. I think I was also asking for the budgetary line items for those particular items, which Dr. Brabrand indicated he wasn't sure if there were additional costs or if they were going to identify additional items that would be needed for the concurrent plan.
This is Ms. Tolan. I don't have an issue combining them either because I have asked for the cost associated with additional bandwidth if that is determined that we need it during the pilot. So I think we're aligned We're just asking for coming out of that pilot, what equipment, what bandwidth do we need, and what's the budgetary implication?
Okay, so which numbers will be combined then? That's Ms. Tolan's at number 4.
I think I was number 2 or something.
Okay, now, all right, yeah, line number 4, and then Ms. Keys Kamara, which is line 7. Ms. Melberg, are you
It's actually, I'm not doing it. It's actually, I think Dr. Anderson is doing it.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I think so, because when I go in to do it, it's already done.
Okay.
But I will take credit. I'm happy to do that.
Dr. Anderson, are you in fact doing that change?
I did start to make the changes between myself and Miss Corbett Sanders, but I'm happy to help because the document is open in front of me here. It doesn't matter. I will let it be to Miss Mulberg. I'll stop. I just fixed mine to Miss Corbett Sanders.
Okay, let's turn it back over to Ms. Mulberg. So Ms. Mulberg, if you could please combine line 4, which was Ms. Tolan's, and line 7, which was Ms. Keys Kamara. And that would be the, budgetary impacts as well as the data, budgetary, information. So Maish, it seemed like you just added something at the end.
Yeah, I just literally couldn't say.
Yeah, I just modified it. I mean, it's, do you want me to speak to it? It's the same thing I've been saying over and over. I mean, with the precious dollars we have, I still want to focus on, the student, where are the achievement gaps that, we've been talking about compensatory services, but for all kinds of kids who are, struggling, who are going to be struggling when they arrive, I really think we've missed the mark on identifying need. So I want to make sure that we do an analysis of that to best use our dollars. I mean, at the end of the day, we're in the business of teaching kids. So that's what mine is trying to capture is really doing to be able to prioritize. We need an analysis of where the highest needs are right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I mean, the highest anticipated achievement gaps, I mean, there's no educational data that's collected yet this quarter. They can extrapolate on the past. We have reports like the Title I report, the advisory committee. 1. I just don't recall talking, when we talk about the quarterly report. Well, I don't know, Ms. Burden, do you want to speak to just, is this in the realm of follow-up for this discussion? Again, is this a budget question? I'm getting muddled between the difference of submitting a follow-up here versus doing a budget question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could go either way, but if you include it on next steps, then, either way, whether you include it on next steps or budget questions, we'll provide an answer.
Okay.
So
right. We'll get hung up on the delivery process. Thank you.
Maybe Ms. Marin, to clarify it, I can ask for the budget implications because if we're not accounting for it now, it's just going to be an afterthought later, and we're not going to have the funds to, do right by the most vulnerable kids. So I can modify it to reflect that.
Okay, well, now's the time that we're going to do this. So, whether that happens now or if you continue to discuss with them about what you're looking for.
Ms. Marin, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
The documents were combined for some reason. Someone combined the legislative program and the first quarter budget review next step documents, but we actually sort next steps by subject. when we have the responses. So I'm trying to figure out which of these were from the legislative program. I believe it's just the first one from Ms. Corbett Sanders, if someone can confirm that. So,
That's what I understand.
okay, thank you.
Ms. Malberg, I will also confirm that since I've been toying around in this next steps document as well.
Okay, thank you.
But the first one by Ms. Corbett Sanders about staff, that's for budget, not legislative.
That is, okay.
That is for budget. There was another one for legislative that I put in, and I can't remember what it was, to tell you.
What about, yeah, I think these were all budget. I don't think any of these were legislative, although honestly, I thought I first saw one and now the document is the way it is. So
it's okay. We'll figure it out. Thank
you. Yeah, I think they're all budget. So, okay, well then, shall we go ahead and take a consensus of if we are okay? I still see some hands up. Are there questions or are people's hands just up?
Ms. Marin, I do have a quick question. I just want to clarify that we're not asking staff necessarily to bring a decision around what devices will be used by our youngest students to the meeting on Thursday. That we'll give them time to have their working groups with teachers and principals, stakeholders to figure out what devices we're going to be ordering. So Ms. Corbett Sanders, I don't know if we need to reword.
So the plan, what we asked for, because we originally had in the project management plan, a call for an RFP for devices for our youngest learners in October. That no longer is, nobody seems to know what that RFP would be or whether or not they're ready for it. So what we're asking for is a plan and a set aside of financials as to how to accomplish that. And so it may be, as Dr. Brabrand suggested, and Mr. Smith, which was that we would have a two-step process, deploying certain devices today with the plan longer term. They had an idea of what they wanted to do with these devices. It's my understanding that Dr. Sethi is in the process of talking with vendors. And so by Thursday, give us an update and give us any language we need to do so that we don't have an impediment, a motion, provide a motion for us, or say, we don't need a motion because we've already got it, but we need a bit of a plan given that we are now at the end of October and the next time we meet isn't until November 5th. And so if they need between now and November 5th to make a purchase order, then we need to approve it so that we don't have a delay.
I have clarity about the question. So I'm good with the question and we'll be working with the team.
All right, thanks everybody. The word set aside for the budget was the key piece I needed. Thank you.
Okay, I see we have more questions. Can we just really keep it limited? Yes, Ms. McLaughlin.
I don't have a question, Ms. Marin. I do appreciate you calling on me. The document doesn't allow any editing, so I just wanted to make sure that my two questions were clear. So number, I believe it's 9 now, if I'm able to read this. I just want to make sure it says bring this information, and then second sentence, bring this information and cost estimates. I want cost estimates added in there. And then in number 10, I just want to say in that last sentence where it says, but not reporting to work with the cost estimations associated with it. So number 10 says in the last line, not reporting to work, and it should say and after work. the budget costs associated with this. And then it's fine. I was just trying to make sure it was clear. Oh, good.
Yeah, maybe perhaps Megan, I'm not sure if you have editor access. We'll have to make sure Jen followed with Ms. Melberg on how to make sure.
Yes, she does. She does. Everyone has the editor access.
Okay. Ms. Corbett-Sanders, do you have another question?
Yes, I had the legislative next step that I can give it to you if you want it, or I can just send it in. But it was the legislative next step was to address the, and I know Mr. Malloy agreed to it, which is to come back to us with a, with language on binding arbitration and the provision of our student data. That's because we do know that we have both state and federal activity coming up on that. Thank you.
Okay, so can I call for consensus then on these next steps? So if you are in favor of this group of questions, please raise your hand. And Ms. Mulberg, do I need to take roll for this since it's just consensus?
Just consensus, yes, just a majority.
So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Anyone else agree? 7, 8. Okay, great. We have consensus for these questions. Thank you to staff for going ahead and following up with that. Okay, well, at this time, we will close our meeting, and our next meeting is Thursday for our regular school. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.